Our scripture text this morning is found in chapter 9 of Acts. Acts chapter 9, and we're going to begin with the 36th verse. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha, which translated is Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near to Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please, come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room, and then he got down on his knees and he prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." And she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand, and he helped her to her feet. And then he called the believers and the widows and presented her to them alive. And this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. This is the word of the Lord. Well, it is Memorial Day, and we honor those who have fallen in battle, and we heard a wonderful explanation of that from Rich this morning. We also remember our family members and friends who have died. In my lifetime, I have officiated over 436 funerals, memorial services, or now we call them celebrations of life. 436. And each of these people who died made permanent marks on the lives of various individuals in their communities and their families, just as each of us is making permanent marks now on family members and community members and those who are nearby us. And at the beginning of life, most of us have childhood dreams to grow up to be whatever. What is it we're going to be when we grow up? And we start playing with that idea, and parents play with that idea with their kids. At the beginning of, in my generation, most little boys wanted to grow up to be a fireman, a policeman, or a train engineer. And most little girls wanted to grow up to be a nurse, a teacher, or a mommy. I suppose that was because little boys liked to see the action with the firemen and the policemen and so forth. And little girls responded to some nurturing instincts plus the role model expectations that was placed upon them in that day. In recent years, gender roles have changed and media has expanded our horizons. And so now kids of both genders, they want to grow up to be what? Astronauts. And doctors and professional athletes and rock stars and all the other things that go along with it, architects and CSIs and marine biologists. And that's good. These are worthy goals. They're necessary for the health of our nation. And it's our job as parents, as role models, as teachers, as friends, to encourage the kids to reach for the stars and to be all that they can be. And society needs to have kids of every culture and gender and economic class to reach for these new careers. But now, having said all those positive things about new careers, it needs to also be said that the majority of careers have one thing in common. They define careers by the world's standards. And when we dream of our careers, we start thinking of yardsticks that are primarily how much income will I make? And how much prestige, excuse me, how much fame or authority over others, plus those who want to help humanity in some way, and that's their goal. And the world states up front that, yeah, these are the goals. If you're ever going to make any money in this world, you got to go in this profession. If you're ever going to have any prestige or live in the lifestyle you want, you got to go in this, get this profession. And pretty much we buy into that. But there's some other issues to think about as we live our lives and we mold our futures. The author of Hebrews, you know this piece. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. Now, Hebrews talks about life being sort of like an Olympic race, and it's not just the 100-meter dash or the 300-meter sprint. It's more like the steeplechase, in which you're covering a lot of ground and going through every kind of obstacle as you're trying to grow through life. But okay, now a problem. In reality, any career or life plans, whether in-home or out of home, consume most of our energy. And if life is a race, then in these lifelong competitions, not everybody is going to win the Olympic gold or get the corner office in the firm or hit the $1 million mark in our personal portfolio. Most of us will struggle with some degree of failure and several do-overs along the way, and if we end up with more daily victories than failures, then we think life all in all has been very good. So let's look at how it's possible anywhere along life's path to pursue a career or retirement goals, or allow for ambitions of a different kind as well. For example, how do we mesh the demands of a workaday world to that which we're driven as kids, as youth, as we grow up, with the goals that we're called upon to be Christians to achieve a life in Christ? I've had to work my way through this, evolving out of when I retired 14 years ago. After 41 years, I retired as a senior pastor. So then I had to deal with the reality of being retired from my profession, but not being retired from my Christian calling. So what should my calling lead me to do during the last 25 years or so of my life? And voila, here I am. Plus, I've been serving as a CASA for the past 12 years, but that really is not the larger answer. That's really not it. The greater issue is, what are goals what greater goals can we achieve through Christ while we're involved either in a career or in retirement or in recreation or in volunteer work or whatever it is we are doing, wherever we are? When we explore that question, then we start to ask another, how can I serve God and fulfill His mission for me? How can I be a man or woman of integrity? How can I share my faith in a helpful way? How can I show kindness and demonstrate mercy in the world that I'm living in? None of these questions ever appear on a vocational aptitude test. None of these questions ever appear on job application forms. And seldom do we ever include these in our resumes. But we only have one life to live, and this life is a precious gift, and we don't get a second go-around. Neither God nor the great cloud of witnesses surrounding us want us to blow it in life. All right, so does that mean that we must win the Heisman Trophy or the Phi Beta Kappa Key, or do we have to become a Rhodes Scholar or Miss USA or win the Farmer of the Year award? What is it that we need to do to please all of this? Okay, here's the curious thing. We begin life with all of those career aspirations. But near the end of life, what are the most important things for which you and I will be remembered at our memorial service or our celebration of life? Out of all of those 436 funerals over which I have officiated, what do friends and relatives usually say about those who have died? That person who has died. What qualities that mark their lives are the most meaningful to those who have known them as family members or friends or working partners or acquaintances? Do they mention their occupations in military service? Absolutely. Yes, they do. Do they mention their achievements in sports or music or civic awards or employee of the month? Yes, they do. Yeah, we talk about that. Do they mention how much money and property they've accumulated in a lifetime? Almost never. I cannot remember anyone standing up and saying, Kevin Smith died with a net worth of $632,000.15. I've never heard that. I've never heard anyone say Sarah Lou Wiley died owning the most expensive furniture on the block. Never heard that. Now, of course, their heirs might have some interest in those accumulations. But such things are never mentioned in the attribute of our characters and who we were. Do friends stand up at a memorial service and say that the crowning achievement of her life was that she sold 247 homes in her career? Never. What friends and families gather to talk about the one who has died, when they talk about her or him, they talk about how trustworthy he was, how she was their strength, how he could always be counted on to solve a problem, how she sat up night after night worrying about her kids when they weren't home yet, how he nearly broke his health working to ensure that his family would be covered and have what they needed, how her faith and spiritual depth gave them the courage to keep going. None of those things have to do with career objectives and goals of power over other people and control. They have to do with the spiritual depth and strength of character. And when no one can say these things about a person, it's always a very quiet and short service. And I've had a few of those too. At the end of life, as we reflect back upon a person's journey, these are the things that are important. But early in life, they are seldom the goals of youth and kids who want to achieve or the issues that they want to explore in life. So we start out very differently than we end. In our world today, we're quick to train them in welding and software programming, but not so much in teaching integrity and morality and compassion and honoring God in all that we do. Voices out of the past set different values and priorities for us. Since this is Memorial Day, remember a guy, you may remember the name, George Washington. George Washington said, "I hope I shall always possess firmness and virtue enough to maintain what I consider the most enviable of all titles, the character of an honest man." He was not first concerned to be known as a wealthy, successful plantation owner. He was not even concerned to be known as the first president of the United States. What he wanted to be known for was to be remembered as an honest man. Even William Shakespeare got into it in a beautiful way. William Shakespeare said it well, good name, in man and woman, dear my lord. It is the immediate jewel of their souls, that good name. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, 'tis nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, 'tis been the slaves of thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which can do him no good and which makes me poor indeed. J.P. Morgan was asked what he considered to be the best bank collateral, and without hesitation, he said character. Well, that's obviously from a long time ago. We don't ask that question anymore that way. But that was a time when the Nike Corporation could be started on $500 in a handshake. That's all that was necessary to bind a deal. Because they could trust one another in their business dealing. Whether we're a shop clerk or a bank president or a welder or a school teacher or a homemaker or a mill worker or in sales, a good name and a reputation for honesty far outlasts our job titles clear into eternity. When it comes to our memorial services, what will people remember about us? Is it the godly qualities for which we will be honored? That's what really counts about us in most other people's minds. The aged physician sat in the sunshine, and he was reflecting upon the progress that had been made in medicine over the past 50 years. And though he was the last to admit it, much of the progress was due to his own efforts. For this, he was named Father of Medicine. His name was Hippocrates. And he was born on the island of Kos in 460 BC, and he devoted all of his adult life to the advancement of medical science. As he studied all known methods, drugs, instruments of treatment, and ideas, he worked them all together. He organized them into the first rational system of medicine. Now he was nearing the end of his life, and he was looking back with pleasure on how the younger disciples would carry on the work and how his writings would be the basis of all the medical schools. Then his mind turned to the young men who had come to learn the practice of medicine in recent years. And he's looking at them and considering them. Most of them were ambitious, and they were serious-minded, and they generally were well-intentioned. But what about their principles? What about their ideals? What about their ethical standards? He knew that character and personal integrity were very important in the practice of medicine. The venerable old man with snowy white hair also knew that with as many books as he had written, he had one more book he had to write before he died. Because he knew that in medicine, as in any other career or discipline or intimate relationship between people, whether doctor, patient, business person, and client, required a code of ethics. Knowledge and skill are not enough. Honor and trust were essential. And if medicine was to advance and truly help people. And so he wrote what has become known as the Hippocratic Oath. To which all physicians must subscribe before they practice medicine. It does not speak of skills at diagnosis, or steady hands that hold a scalpel, or analytic brains that can accurately mix chemicals, or sharp eyes that can accurately read X-ray films. It doesn't mention any of that. It speaks of promises. Promises not to be involved in corruption or temptations to actions of ill repute. Promises to do no injury to patients and to protect the rights of the patients by refusing to divulge secrets that are not to be heard by other ears. Promises to lead personal lives of uprightness and commitment to the common good. It has to do with being the kind of people of God, the kind of people that God designed us to be. It has to do with the kind of things which people remember about friends and loved ones at funeral services and memorial services and celebrations of life. The essential things about our lives. That's what people remember. That's how we'll be judged. It has to do with character and integrity and compassion and self-giving and commitment and spiritual depth. That's what's important about our lives and our life's work when it comes to the end of our days. It's been my experience in all those funerals and memorial services that some of the least known people have had the greatest impact on life and the greatest things said about them. While some of the world's best-known leaders are the butt of constant jokes or ridicule, some of the least known servants in this world are the greatest sources of strength and courage and love. Take Tabitha, Dorcas, a disciple of the Lord. She's known for very little in this world. Certainly not a famous historical personality. Tabitha was neither a prophet nor an apostle. She didn't have any great leadership role in government. Except that 2,000 years later, here I am in Klamath Falls, Oregon, USA, talking about her. And a lot of you know her name. What great things did she do? She was a seamstress. That was it. I can't imagine 2,000 years from now anyone talking about my life. Can you? About yours? And yet here we're talking about Tabitha. Why? Wasn't she just a seamstress? No. She was a woman abounding with deeds of kindness and charity, which she continually did. She ministered to the widows, making them badly needed new outfits of clothing. And when Peter got there to the room where her body lay, they were showing her all the stuff that she had made for them. Now, why was it a big deal for the widows? In that society, widows were at the bottom rung of the social and economic life ladder. Most lived in terrible poverty. If they outlived their husbands, they were in terrible trouble. There was no Social Security in that day. There were no pensions. There were no CDs, as if that did anything now. No bank accounts, no stock portfolios. There were no Walmart stores where they could go to work as greeters. How did they survive? It was Tabitha who was making beautiful clothing for them, serviceable clothing for them, that they could ill afford. Tabitha loved those vulnerable women and showed them nonstop kindness and filled their lives with hope and cheer. That's the spirit for which she was remembered and which caused so much grief when she died. You see, that's the spirit that caused her to become famous in history. That's the spirit that gives us this sense of our life going past our own physical being. And how should you and I best be remembered when we die? Well, the prophet Micah tells us, God has told you what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. That's what people are best remembered for at the end of their lives. And that's what we must train up each other from our childhood to be and to do as they grow through life. Oh God, what a privilege to share in our lives and the lives of others, to be able to reach out and encourage, to supply, to support, to undergird, to love, to embrace, to offer a gentle word, that many more lives may be blessed because of our faithfulness. Thank you for memories, O God, and thank you for hopes for our own futures. Amen.